Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today, we're going to have a very interesting show, very special and very pleased to have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with us today to talk about his work, with vaccines, his latest documentary on medical racism, and we'll be going into that. I first want to give a little bit of a background. Many of you already know him, of course. Robert F. Kennedy is, of course, the son of former Senator and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of former President John F. Kennedy. He is an attorney, an environmental activist, syndicated radio talk host, and is the co-founder and president of, this is going back in time a bit, the Waterkeeper Alliance, an environmental protection organization focused on the preservation and conservation of water resources. Most recently, he became the chairman of the Children's Health Defense Organization, which provides an in-depth education and information about health, the current trends toward vaccines, information you will not find in the mainstream media, and he highlights the major concerns we all need to know about these vaccines. And further, it's, as it would stand to reason, Bobby is oftentimes called an anti-vaxxer, which anyone else, of course, has the right to be as well. However, more accurately, I like to describe it as he is asking deep questions about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, which the medical establishment and media just don't seem to appreciate. Today's show is going to be looking at largely his latest film, a documentary called Medical Racism, The New Apartheid, which is a searing look at the abuse, largely of people of color, by the medical establishment and by our government. It is painful, it is harrowing, I've seen it a few times, and it tells the story of systemic abuse of power, specifically aimed at Black Americans, young and old. So, Bobby, welcome to A Better World. A pleasure to have you. Your work is excellent and so needed and called for these days. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about what inspired your taking on the subject of medical racism. I know that your family, you and your family, have been involved in the civil rights movement and an advocate for decades, generations, really. So just give us a little bit of an idea of what was behind this film.
This is something I've been writing about for a long time, because when you start, and you're right, I'm not anti-vaccine. I've always said that. That pejorative of calling me anti-vax is is an industry talking point, and it's a strategic, insult to try to marginalize me, to characterize me, mischaracterize me, to vilify me as a crazy person.
Yes.
As a dangerous person that nobody ought to listen to. The impulse behind that is to try to make sure to derail debate, make sure that we don't have a civil, kind-hearted, polite discussion about, that allows people to question orthodoxies and to talk about science. And we ought to, those are things that are very important in our democracy. And in medicine, medicine is not a good place for authoritarianism. Medicine is about listening to people, about testing ideas, about subjecting them to the cauldron of debate, and about trying to develop the newest techniques and treatments and to diagnose illness by listening to people. And
exactly. I mean, it's supposed to be a rational, intellectual discourse. That's what science is. That's what medicine is. And the government is supposed to be behind the highest level of those when it funds different programs and projects. But that has been seemingly virtually the opposite case. And I want to just say here for us at A Better World that from our point of view and many, many others, you are actually a hero for having stood up against tremendous odds in this world of people who just want to, as you said, speak badly of you and try to discredit you on any level they can. But please know that there are so many, literally millions of people that are completely championing what you're doing with the children's health defense and all of the work that you're doing. So I know you know that, but I just wanted to make it completely explicit. And we here at A Better World are among certainly those advocates. So I'm sure you appreciate whatever help you can get.
The issue of medical racism was something that I've written about many, many years, because when you first start looking at the science, one of the things that is striking is that there's a well-documented and disproportionate level of vaccine injury among Black Americans. And we've seen this for many years, and there's also, and the agencies know about it, CDC knows that, and has actively tried to hide that from Black Americans. And I'll give you an example. In 2004, 2003, 2004, CDC did a huge study on the MMR vaccine, and to try to exculpate it from charges that vaccines were causing autism. CDC, for reason I won't go into in detail now, had done an internal study. And the internal study showed that vaccines that had mercury in them, particularly the hepatitis B vaccine, was associated with an 1,135% greater chance of getting an autism diagnosis. And back then, among kids who got that vaccine during the first 30 days of life compared to children who didn't or who got it later.
Mm-hmm.
And that was called the Verstraeten study. It was an internal study that CDC never released, but they tried to hide it from people. And a later study showed that that Black kids who got that same vaccine, the hepatitis B vaccine, the first 30 days had a 53% greater chance of getting an autism diagnosis later in life. CDC by 2004 knew that the mercury vaccines were causing severe neurological damage, including autism. But they believed the MMR vaccine was safe, and that a lot of parents blame the MMR vaccine for giving their children autism, but CDC, and this is according to CDC's top scientist, senior scientist, Bill Thompson, that the MMR vaccine is given on the same day as several mercury vaccines. The CDC believed that parents who were making an observation between the MMR vaccine and autism were actually seeing the impacts of the mercury vaccine, and the MMR vaccine was not causing autism.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they believe that doing a real study on the MMR vaccine, a genuine study, could exculpate that vaccine and discredit all the people who were blaming it. And so they did a study, and they had 5 of their top scientists who were involved in the study, including Bill Thompson, who was supposed to be the primary author, and Frank DeStefano, who was the head of the Immunization Safety Office at CDC. And they looked at children in Georgia, which is where CDC's headquarters is. And when they first running the data, the raw data came back, the researchers immediately were struck by the fact that children who got the MMR vaccine, Black boys, were 350% greater chance, more at risk for getting an autism diagnosis than whites or Black boys who didn't get it within the first 36 months. So kids waited. And those researchers were ordered by their boss, Frank DeStefano, to come in to bring all the data on the Black kids into a conference room at the CDC and to destroy it there. So that's and they published the article, which is called 7/2004, and that article is the main bulwark for the CDC's assertion that vaccines don't cause autism. And they knew when they did that that the vaccine were associated with big autism signals in Black boys. And in 2010, one of the big promoters of vaccines, Greg Poland, from the Mayo Clinic, who was one of the Pangerons of vaccinology, did a study that looked at the MMR vaccine and the response, particularly of Black people. And he found something that shocked him and that shocked the medical community, which was that Blacks, apparently, because they have essentially a more robust immune system than whites, were getting double the antibody response to the same amount of antigens. In other words, the antigen is the viral particle that they inject you with to provoke an antibody response. And when they inject you with that antigen from measles, the antigen from mumps, it's a viral particle of that disease. They're calibrating the amount they give you to promote a specific antibody response. They don't want to go too far and provoke too much antibody response. Because if you do that, you can tip the patient into autoimmunity, where their bodies start saying,
yes,
oh, everything is dangerous, and I need to start attacking my own organs. And that is where juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Graves' disease, Crohn's disease, Bell's palsy, Mmr, those are all autoimmune reactions. And that's why you have to very carefully calibrate the antibody response. What they found out was that Blacks had double the antibody response to whites, the same amount of antigen, which means Blacks were getting too much. And that may be because of many studies that indicate that Blacks were disproportionately injured by vaccines to whites. And everybody knew about this study because it was the Mayo Clinic and because it was a vaccine developer who led the study and a big defender of vaccines. And so the question is, what do we do about this? Do we tell Black people? Do we cut the antigens and make a different vaccine for Black people?
Reduce the dosage?
Yeah. But and they decided in the end to do nothing. And so to this day, 10 years, a decade later, Blacks are still getting a vaccine that the medical community knows is not suitable for them. And there were many other examples in the early 90s. The Los Angeles Times broke a story that the CDC had been conducting an experiment with a very hyped measles vaccine.
Oh, yes.
And they had done it. They had experimented on 4 populations, one in Cameroon in West Africa, which is, of course, a Black population, another in Ghana in West Africa. The third one was in Haiti. And the fourth group that they were giving this experimental and very, very dangerous
in LA
was in LA and South Central. And they gave it to 1,500 Black kids in LA. And it killed a lot of girls. That vaccine killed girls. And CDC had to pull it eventually. They didn't tell any of the parents, and people did not know that they had been experimented on until the Los Angeles Times broke that story. Many other stories like that are in the...
Which, of course, you go into in the film in some detail, which makes it all the more searing and harrowing, as I was describing. But, you know, you also have a background from your family and yourself personally in the world of government. Now, at the risk of sounding naive, how is it that none of this has been brought to the attention, or if it has been brought to the attention of Congress, there has been so little action? For instance, I understood that there was an effort to bring Dr. Thompson in to testify to a Senate subcommittee hearing, and it just got nowhere. Is that because so much of the Congress is in the pocket of big pharma?
The pharmaceutical companies are the biggest lobbyists on Capitol Hill. So I've been suing oil companies for 40 years.
Sure.
And, assume that they own Congress. It's very, very difficult to get any kind of legislation through Congress
Yeah.
Because particularly the Republican Party, but also the oil state Democrats from Oklahoma, from Alaska, from Louisiana,
Louisiana.
and from Texas, gave them, who are chairs of these committees and the minority, leader of those committees, our version of the key committees are all virtually controlled by the oil industry.
Yes.
And so they're very powerful, but pharmaceutical companies give double what oil and gas, which is the second biggest contributor, and about 4 times what defense and aerospace get. So they're by far the biggest lobbyists. They have more lobbyists on Capitol Hill than Congress and the Senate and the Supreme Court justices all combined. There's more lobbyists. So they really control the legislative process. They can completely control the agencies. The agencies are sock puppets for the industry that are supposed to regulate. And they unfortunately control the press in our country too, because we changed the law in 1997 to allow pharmaceutical advertising on television. And now, Roger Ailes, who started Fox News, told me that during non-election years, for certain segments on his evening news, that pharmaceutical ads were 70% of the revenue. And he said, we cannot put anything on TV that is critical of vaccines because of that.
It's just that simple. It's
it's
a quid pro quo, as they say.
Yeah. And all that money has not just given a platform for advertising these products, but it also has allowed these companies to dictate content.
Yes.
Anderson Cooper is now really not a journalist anymore. He's a pharmaceutical rep and propagandist. And
yes,
he makes $12 million a year, and probably $10 million of that comes from pharmaceutical companies indirectly.
Oh my God.
So it's very, very, basically all of the agencies and all of the institutions in our democracy that normally would stand between a vulnerable child and a greedy corporation have been eliminated or neutralized. And,
so in other words, we don't really have a media anymore to speak of as the watchdog of power, which of course is one of its primary purposes, because they're in bed, and they've been in bed for a long time. But it really has worsened, so much so that the media looks as simply like a cheerleader. And that brings us around to this whole matter of vaccines regarding COVID. And so if you watch the nightly news, you would think that these statistics about cases and fatalities and the like are accurate, and you will get appropriately upset and scared and nervous. And some people feel prompted then to want to get the vaccine, since that's the, the treatment du jour. But could you shed some light on these areas for us so people can get another view of what the actual facts are?
Well, we don't advise people either to get the vaccine or not to get the vaccine. We don't give advice.
I understand.
Give information. We try to say, here's the information that the government ought to be providing us. And so that individuals, because really the choice to vaccinate there are many, many variables, and they include, which vaccine is the safest for you.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any of that data. Which are, what is the risk profile to each group? People who have comorbidities like obesity.
Yes.
People who are seniors who really have a very strong risk, a high risk from COVID.
Sure.
And also a high risk from the vaccine. And then people who are very, very young who have almost no risk from COVID. It's the infection fatality rate is less, probably a tenth the rate of the seasonal flu. It's 0.00004 zeros and a 1. Whereas in the older age group, it could be 7%, which is huge, much bigger than the seasonal flu.
Sure.
And then, so, but we don't really know what the risk is from COVID because that's been clouded too, by these data gathering techniques that say anybody who dies with COVID in their system is a COVID death. Even though CDC admits that only 6% of those deaths had only COVID, the other 94%, it was a 3.8 percent, or 3.8. Each one of those people had an average of 3.8 comorbidities that were potentially lethal. And so we don't know what the real death rate is. We don't know the answer to the question, why are Americans dying more than any other country? Why is it that in Cuba, which was one of the most infected nations, only 14 people out of 100,000 died? And in our country, it's 1,500 per 100,000, so more than 10 times. Why is it in African countries that African Blacks are dying at about the rate in many countries of 1 per 100,000, where in our country, the rate is for Blacks is higher than anybody? So nobody's trying to answer the very, very important questions. And we don't know, the clinical trials were very short and they're incapable of capturing long-term injuries.
For sure.
There were not people in those trials who had a lot of comorbidities, and particularly there weren't a lot of people in the older age group. So you don't, the opportunity to assess risk prior to the marketing of these vaccines, the emergency use authorization was almost nil. And, this idea that, well, we will see injuries and deaths as we do this population-wide experiment with these unapproved vaccines is a canard. You are not going to see the deaths because there is, and the injuries because there is no functioning surveillance system unless you're methodically collecting every death.
Sure.
And then comparing that to background rates for deaths per 100,000. For example, in our country, if historically in the group between 75 years old and 85 years old, out of every 100,000 people in that age group, 12 die a day. That's the back of natural causes.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to collect all the data from people who die immediately after vaccination and see if, for example, after the Pfizer vaccine, if 50 people are dying per day, which is quite possible of what we're seeing anecdotally. And then you look at the Pfizer vaccine and you say, well, only 12 people are dying from that. And the health agency could say to people who are seniors, you better take the Pfizer vaccine and stay away from Moderna. But none of that data is getting out there. We don't have it. Instead, the CDC's position is that anybody who dies with COVID in their system died from COVID, even if they died in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who dies following vaccination, vaccines weren't involved. And CDC has literally said that. There's no evidence, even though 1,600 people have been reported dead, within very, very fast after the vaccine. The CDC says we investigated them all and none of them are vaccine related. There is no way that could have happened. There is no way when people die of a vaccine, there's no fingerprint that the vaccine leaves. Somebody who dies of a heart attack after vaccination, you don't know whether they would have died anyway or whether it was the vaccine that triggered that heart attack. The heart attack does not look any different. Even if you do a full autopsy, there's no way to tell. The only thing that you can do, for example, I did an article that said Hank Aaron's death was one of many following vaccines. I didn't say it was from the vaccine because nobody can say that.
Mm-hmm.
But I said that there are a lot of deaths that are being reported immediately after vaccination, and his is one of those. And I got hammered by all of the networks, Inside Edition, the New York Times, and they all said, they copied the New York Times report, which is that the Fulton County coroner in Atlanta had determined that Hank Aaron's death was unrelated to vaccination. So I said to myself, as I was getting hammered, I and that Instagram removed me, even though I didn't put it on Instagram.
I heard that Instagram removed you for quoting the CDC's own documents.
Yeah. So I called up the Fulton County coroner and I said, how in the world did you make this determination? Because I've never heard of anybody being able to make it. And they said, we never saw Hank Aaron's body. And never did an autopsy. There was no postmortem. The New York Times just made it up. And everybody copied them. And, I got ejected from social media. But the fact is, what they need to be doing is collecting all the deaths following vaccination and then showing us the data and not patronizing us, not being condescending, not saying we're going to hide data and makes people scared of vaccines, and we're going to give them data that makes them want to take the vaccine. And, people know that they're being manipulated. And
Absolutely.
it is, and that's why we have vaccine hesitancy. It's not because people love Donald Trump and, are doing whatever he tells them to do. It's because people have legitimate questions and know that we're manipulated.
And deserve legitimate answers. These are life-threatening matters here that we're staring at, It's crazy. What is your...
Well, I need to hop off now because
because we're out of time. Yes. Well, look, we have just barely touched the tip of the iceberg. So I would love to have you back when you're not as pressured with all that you're doing. Is that a workable scenario?
Of course.
Beautiful.
Anytime. Really good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much for the good work you're doing. Keep it up. We're behind you.
Thank you.
As are so many. Absolutely. Wow, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I would certainly recommend that you see the film. Go to the website, childrenshealthdefense.org. The film is actually right there, and you can see it for yourself and learn about what the work is that Bobby and his team are doing, because it's groundbreaking, it's rational, it asks the hard-hitting questions that we all need answers to very legitimately. And it's not a matter of being anti-vax, as I say to my friends oftentimes, when they say, did you take your vaccine, my vaccine? I say, oh, I'll take a vaccine once it's proven to be safe and efficacious. No problem. I'll certainly consider it. But that hasn't happened yet. And so therefore, no vaccine for me. But certainly, there is nothing conceptually about it that I wouldn't be interested in if it helps to literally save lives and protect people and be more efficacious than natural means or even other medical means that we know are available. So on that note, I want to just thank you all for listening today, and I hope you go and visit childrenshealthdefense.org, see the film, and share it with others, because we're at this critical moment in human history, actually. And there's a lot of danger and there's a lot of propaganda being foisted out there. And it is up to us to truly discern and think through these matters without labeling each other anti-vaxxers or what have you, but really to scrutinize the data, as Bobby was really strongly recommending, and looking also at a very serious question that I really like to ask here, which is, who do we trust and why? Look at a track record, look at the subject even of forgiveness, look at justice, and look at that deep question that we all have to ask ourselves of who do we trust, who is the authority in our minds and hearts, and why. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us today. Visit us at our website, www.abetterworld.tv. Spread this as well to your friends, family, and colleagues so more people can get the benefit. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.